Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. Although the majority of attendees are over Zoom, there is a small socially distanced crowd present here to enable the Siyum to take place with the minyan. This is now explicitly allowed by the government following the end of lockdown and a return to Tier 2. And although everyone here is wearing a mask, once again, as per government guidance, speakers do not need to wear masks if sufficiently distanced from the nearest attendee. Following the deeply moving Shloshim tribute last night, we're now going to complete 2 cycles of Mishnayos. I would like to thank Brian Beckman for giving the impetus to this project by suggesting the learning. I would also like to thank the UK Rabbinate for learning the first cycle, Rabbi Alex Israel and Alon Shvut for organising the second cycle, and for everyone who joined, and Rabbi Ginsbury and the team at Raleigh Close for hosting the in-person part of the Siyum. I would also like to thank the Sachs family for giving the Rabbinical Council of the United Synagogue the honour of facilitating the Siyum. And we wish Arifas Yomim to Lady Elaine, to Josh, to Dina, to Gila, to Rabbi Sachs's brothers Alan, Elliot and Brian, and all the family. The speed with which the Mishnayos were taken, even the complicated ones, is another testament to the incredible esteem in which we hold and the Hakaras HaTov we have for your dear husband, father, and brother, Rabbi Sachs, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the Chief Rabbi, Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, who also participates in the learning, to open the proceedings with some Divrei Brocha and Chizuk.
Dayanim, Rabbanim, members of the Sachs family, ladies and gentlemen. The part that I played in the learning of Mishnayot was the Masechet that I chose, which is Masechet Menachot. And I'd like to share with you some reflections on the concept of a mincha. Mincha, of course, was a meal offering brought in the temple. But fascinatingly, the term mincha appears in this week's Parshat HaShavua of Parshat Vayishlach. Yaakov Avinu sent a gift of animals to his twin brother Esav in order to appease him. Mincha hi shlucha ladoni le'esav. A mincha sent to his brother Esav. Mincha therefore ranks as an outstanding gift that one can give. Onkelus's translation for mincha is tikrufta. And there are 2 ways of understanding the term. Tikrufta, meaning sacrifice. In order to give that gift, you need to invest, perhaps money or talent or effort, in order to give of something which you're now going to be missing because you're handing it over. There's sacrifice involved. And secondly, tikrufta from the term karov means closeness. Through giving of the gift, you become closer to the person who is the recipient. And that, of course, was the entire aim of Yaakov Avinu in giving this mincha to his brother Esav. So that's what happens when one gives the mincha. And actually there is a further dimension of tikrufta. Because when one person gives to another person, HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels close to that situation. And tikrufta, closeness to Hashem, takes place as well. That is why Parshat Kedoshim of the Torah, the parsha dealing with the holiness of God, is primarily comprised of mitzvot bein adam lechavero, commandments between ourselves and our fellow human beings, because through us becoming closer to each other, kedusha is present. And that is exactly what happens under a chuppah. How is kiddushin achieved? Kiddushin, which is holy marriage, it's not through a bracha. We don't even mention the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rather, a mincha is given by the chatan to the kala. It's a ring that he has invested in, he's paid money for. He has given his affection through this ring. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is aware of one person giving to another person, the presence of Hashem is there, Kiddushin takes place. One of the most wonderful ways through which to give a mincha in this world is through being a rabbi. Being a rabbi means that you're giving of yourself, you're investing in the gift of learning, of inspiration, of spirituality. And it's far better than a tangible gift. When rabbis give a mincha, you touch the hearts of people, you mold minds, you transform lives. That mincha is taken by the recipient. It empowers them and enhances their life for the rest of their existence. Being a rabbi involves tikrufta, sacrifice. It's not easy. You need to sacrifice a whole lot of elements of your life. There is a constant tension between home life and community life. And not a single rabbi has ever come across a community in which every single person they're dealing with is an angel. There are difficulties. It's not easy. There is tikrufta. But by being a rabbi, one can achieve tikrufta of an extraordinary kind, because you come close to people. You're within the inner circle of their existence at the prime, most significant points of their lives. And you can bring them close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So through being the Rav, one feels the presence of Hashem in everything that one does. And I believe that it is in this context that we can view the most extraordinary life of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha. He gave the most remarkable mincha. He lived in order to give, to transform, to inspire. Tikrufta was achieved because he came close to people, right around the globe. That element of tikrufta, the way in which people have, during the past 30 days, expressed their pain, their grief, the connection that has been broken through Torah, through inspiration. And thanks to him, tikrufta was achieved because so many people strengthened their connection, their bond to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It has therefore been so very meaningful for us, the Rabbanim within the Rabbinical Council of the United Synagogue, together with others, to study Mishnayot during the past month, Le'ilui Nishmato, of our most wonderful, revered leader, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha. He has inspired us always to engage in our gift of menachot to others, to establish tikrufta. And he has taught us how rewarding it can be for us, and through our efforts, how rewarding it can be for others. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless his neshama in Gan Eden. And thanks to everything he taught and all the inspiration he gave and all the menachot that he conveyed, we are certain that his presence will be with us together with thousands of others ad le'olam va'ed. And through his merit, may we always dedicate ourselves to give more and more menachot throughout our lives. Yisifro Baruch. Amen.
Thank you, Chief Rabbi. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Rabbi Alex Israel, a Talmud of Rabbi Sacks. Rabbi Israel is an author, Tanakh teacher, an international lecturer, and has also helped arrange today.
Family, Lady Elaine, Josh, Dina, and Gila, and brothers Brian, Alan, Elliot, and all the wider family. Josh, I saw you at your virtual Zoom Shiva, but this is my first opportunity to personally express my condolences, or better put, as we say in Hebrew, lishtatef b'tzarachem, to share in your grief. And that sharing, of course, is a tonic for the soul. Rabbi Sachs, in his most recent book, quotes the Talmudic story of Rabbi Yochanan, who cannot arise from his sickbed alone. But when Rabbi Chanina extends his hand to help him, he manages to get up. Why is that? The Gemara explains, Ein chavush matir atzmo mibeit ha'asurim. A prisoner cannot release himself from prison, or in other words, in a low and vulnerable situation, we find strength through the assistance, care, and love of others. Due to coronavirus, we and many thousands of others were unable to pay our respects to Rabbi Sachs. But I hope that the manifold tributes and the outpouring of love and grief has extended a virtual hand to you, the dear family of Rabbi Sachs. And I hope that you are feeling that the hands of tens and thousands of people who studied Mishnayot for this Siyum to honor Rabbi Sachs is extended to you and will in some dimension ameliorate your loss and your grief and help you all to rise. Ladies and gentlemen, Rabbanim Mechubadim Kal Kadosh, after yesterday's honorable tributes, I've been asking myself what is left to say. And so I decided to be me, to bring my perspective as a Talmud of Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs left this world so fast, so suddenly. I was searching for an analogy, an expression or image that might express that. And it came to me in a dramatic scene in which the great Eliyahu Hanavi departed this world, suddenly soaring heavenwards in that famous fiery chariot, while 50 ish mi bnei Hanaviim halchu v'yamdu mineged mirachok. His students, Eliyahu's students and followers, looked on from a distance. The fiery chariot suddenly separated Eliyahu from Elisha, his closest student, and Eliyahu is gone. Elisha exclaims, Avi, Avi, Rechav Yisrael Farashav, tore his clothes. And then we read how he picked up Elijah's mantle. There are several features of this episode to which I would like to relate. The first is the supernal status of Eliyahu, which seems to reflect the words that I've heard so many people describe about Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs: transcendent, majestic, mesmerizing. The second reflections are the circles of students and admirers who watch and experience Eliyahu's departure from a distance, and yet who are shocked, confused, lost, and hurting from the experience. In a way, I'm a student at a distance, a funny sort of Talmud. I didn't, as Rabbi Sachs did with his Rav Rabinovich, attend Rabbi Sachs's shiurim day in and day out. I was a student at London School of Economics, not Jews College in London in the 80s, but me and my friends would follow Rabbi Sachs around like groupies to every public lecture. We were starstruck. Every lecture was a masterpiece. And we would go from shul to listen. Then came his books. I remember so clearly reading Rabbi Sachs's first book, Traditional Alternatives, and feeling that someone had just brought my world into focus, had explained the landscape in which I live. And so with each book. And in more recent years, as a Tanakh teacher here in Israel, I would begin reading Covenant and Conversation on a weekly basis, and not always expecting to read anything exceptional, and then suddenly feel blown away by a particular reading or argument. His writings and teachings have given my Judaism and my vision structure and direction. What is a Rav? A Rav is a teacher, a person who, after one has studied with him or with her, one sees the world entirely differently. One is given a new lens to process, to see yourself, to see your mission. As Elisha said about his Rebbe, Eliyahu, Avi, Avi, and Chazal say that as a father gives biological life to a child, a rabbi gives a spiritual life to a student, sends him to Olam Haba in the sense that now he understands what his role is in the world. That has been my experience, and again, thousands of readers of Rabbi Sacks. But then I have to add another dimension, and that is the wonderful personal conversations which Rabbi Sacks made time for me, his warmth and his kindness. There was a trust and a belief in us young people. As a young B'nai Akiva Madrich or a Smicha student, we hardly knew ourselves, and we weren't aware of our abilities. In Anglo Jewry, as it was then, we were frequently looked at askance as unproved youth leaders. Rabbi Sacks was a breath of fresh air, breathing wind into our sails. And for me, and so many of my colleagues, people who were young Rabbanim, teachers, youth workers, and who are now communal leaders, who we did not believe in ourselves, and we questioned our direction, Rabbi Sacks gave us confidence and energy. We believed in ourselves because he believed in us. And for all of this, we are so grateful and thankful. We are his Talmidim because through his books and teachings, through his wise counsel and personal encouragement, he made us who we are. But I'm not finished with Eliyahu. Elisha, his student, cries out, Avi, Avi, Rechav Yisrael Parashav. Father, Father, Israel's chariots and his horsemen. A very puzzling line. What does this mean? The Mefarshim all explain that statement, Rechev Yisrael or Parashav, and say that Eliyahu Navi's tefillah, his speech, was even more powerful than armies and chariots. His prayers and his ideas had more substance and more impact than weapons. Rabbi Sacks was indeed the Rechev Yisrael Parashav of the Jewish world, the defender of Israel with words, whether fighting anti-Semitism in the House of Lords, or whether giving a shiur or a speech, his words were uplifting and fiery like those of Eliyahu, and they had impact. Like Eliyahu, who represented God with such passion in the presence of kings, but also to his own nation, he made us believe that Torah was radical then, and it is still radical. The truth is that Rabbi Sacks took issue with Eliyahu on several points. Eliyahu couldn't, says Rabbi Sacks, listen to the Kol D'mama Daka. He saw God as trying to teach Eliyahu the lesson of listening. Likewise, Rabbi Sacks, in his Hesped for Rabbi Norman Lamb, Zichrono Livracha, says that Eliyahu accused the people for their mistakes, where he should have defended them, helped them, and taught them. How fortunate then that in our tradition, Eliyahu is seen as making a return. He is the herald of Mashiach. And here once again, I see some affinity with Rabbi Sacks. Just like Eliyahu visits every Seder, and I might add, Rabbi Sacks is quoted at every Seder table, right? We see that Eliyahu will come, and here I quote the Gemara, the Mishnah in Eduyot, who says, he will come, according to one opinion, lekarev, aval lo lerachek, lahashvot hamachloket, to resolve our world. And v'chachamim orim lo lerachek v'lo lekarev ela la'asot shalom ba'olam. If I can take those statements, that would actually be quite a mission statement which Rabbi Sacks took on. Never was there a Jewish leader who was so pained by the fractures in the world and wanted to heal those fractures. And this is Eliyahu's mantle to us. And this is the catch. This is what we, his students, have to pick up. We feel so powerfully Rabbi Sacks' legacy. We want not only to spread his writings and his Torah, but to do our part in healing that fractured world by taking on that mantle, by picking it up and taking up the responsibility which he has left for us. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
Thank you, Alex. Our next speaker, also in Israel, is Jessica Sacks. In addition to being Rabbi Sacks' niece, Jessica also worked for Rabbi Sacks, including producing a number of significant translations. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you. Well, I'll start at the end because this is a Siyum. Can you hear me all right? Okay. there's a rabbinic tradition to lesayem b'davar tov, so a tractate of Mishnah or Talmud, whatever it's about. There's a tendency to end with a little line that uplifts you. So how does the entirety of the Mishnah end? The end of Masechet Uktzin, which is concerned with Tumah and Tahara, ends like this. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, לא מצא הקדוש ברוך הוא כלי מחזיק ברכה לישראל אלא השלום, שנאמר, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta says, the Holy One found no vessel that could hold blessing for Israel other than peace. As it is said, God will give his people strength, God will bless his people with peace. This has for me a little of the quality of a lot of my uncle's teaching, in that it's a short phrase which, once it's been said, is immediately as if self-evident, and you can see it everywhere. We know in a society or a community or a family or within an individual, you can have all the blessings in the world, material and otherwise, and there's nowhere for it to sit if there's no peace in that collective or in that individual. I found it very, very comforting to hear my Uncle Alan say that at the end of his life, Uncle Jonathan did have that peace, and was able to feel the blessing that he had. And I'm sure that was the product of work, as well as of all the undying loyalty and love that he had from his close family. This is where I begin, because I see my Uncle Jonathan as a peacemaker. I see that as perhaps the focus of his mission. He, in the tradition of that other Davar Tov, which is the end of Masechet Brachot, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. A scholar is somebody who makes peace in the world, adds peace to the world. And I, in the context of the Talmud, I think that primarily is, in the first instance, that's peace between God and Israel. The person who works with Torah is working to make peace between God and his people. And I think that was very centrally what my uncle was doing. And together with that comes peace between communities, between people, peace representing Judaism to the outside in a way that promoted peace and created peace. And many people have spoken about this over the last month, so how he did that in his teaching and his writing. So I want to say a few sentences about how he did it in his translation work, because translators aspire to be invisible and not to be noticed. So I want to just briefly shine a little bit of a light on that work, because as was mentioned, I was very, very fortunate and privileged to work a little with his translations, to work on other translations as part of his projects, and also sometimes to work with his translations closely and see sort of how they were made. I think about translation in terms of different metaphors, and the one that I would use for my uncle in his Siddur and in his Chumash was that of a tour guide and a walking tour. Translation is an indirect way of communicating with people, and I think there's a certain brand of that in the indirect communication that runs through our family, and talking happens best perhaps while walking. So I think of the Siddur and the Machzorim that he made as the kind of walking tour, but a special walking tour, because it's not a tour of a foreign town far away. It's a tour that somebody very wise and learned is giving us of our own hometown. And he's showing us the places that we walk past every day of our lives. And he's pointing out things that that we may have been right in front of our noses all this time, and we never noticed, or we never understood, or we never saw in that way. And from time to time, and this is what you'll always remember a tour guide for, he'll stop and everyone will gather round, and he'll tell you something about a particular landmark. He'll tell you a story, he'll tell you some history, he'll make a personal connection, and that is his commentary. Then there are other moments on the tour which may be the moments that stay with you, but you might not remember the tour guide for them. And those are the moments when he walks you up to the top of a hill, and everybody is walking beside him silently, and he stops at the top of the hill and he doesn't say anything, doesn't even gesture, but he looks down at this vista, and you look down with him, and you see the town as he sees it. That's what a successful translator does. And people like to say that translators have agendas, every translator has his own agenda. I don't identify with that word. I think it's important to have a critical perspective on translations, but I don't identify with that experience, and I don't connect it with any other translator, certainly not my uncle, because it suggests manipulation or trying to deceive. Whereas in fact, every translator takes you up to the top of, takes you up to their favorite vantage point, their own vantage point, and they show you the town from their angle. And it may look completely different from there, from where another translator would take you. But he's showing you the town as he saw it. So how did my uncle see it? I think first and foremost, it was our hometown. That was the first and most important thing. I remember when my grandmother, who must then have been in her late 70s, my uncle, and I believe my uncle Jonathan, it could have been my uncle Alan, so apologies to him if so, gave her a copy of the Living Chumash, Rav Aryeh Kaplan's translation. And I remember my grandmother was not an excitable person, and I remember how excited she was by this gift, because she was quite a self-deprecating person in general, but she always would say that she never had the Jewish education she wanted. She regretted it. Her children surpassed her. It was a little sad, I would say, to hear that kind of self-deprecation from her when we all looked up to her. But clearly, every translation and her shul experience up to that point had always communicated to her that she was not quite Jew enough and not quite clever enough for all of this. The translations were heavy and difficult and archaic, and they were very far removed from the language that she spoke. And suddenly this translation was in a language she could understand. She said even some silly sod like me, or whatever word she used, could understand this. And she had it next to her bed, and she read it as her bedtime reading. And suddenly the Torah had been given to her. And I don't know if that was part of my uncle's decision to translate the Siddur, but it would have been enough to be, because he created a translation that gave full respect to the vast majority of his community, who need help to understand the Hebrew and who are expressing their Jewishness in a million other very important ways. But they need the help of a translation to understand the text, and they deserve a translation that is written in their language and in good, beautiful language, fluid language, and that showed them and gave to them their hometown in the language that they could speak and they could hear. A few things that you might notice going around my uncle's Siddur, and better that you don't notice, which is the translator is best if they're not noticed. But where older translations use the word congregation, he uses the word community, and where older translations use the word hear, O Israel, or obey, he would tend to use listen. Where the Hebrew is, of course, it always has to be in modern Hebrew in documents, it always has to be pointed out that the language here is masculine, but it relates to men and women alike. So in the Torah, this is often the case and is not pointed out. So he used gender neutral language, which is possible in English, and so he wrote children instead of sons and people instead of men whenever it was correct to the text and whenever it was it didn't mess up the English. Used respectful language. If you look closely at Bible translations, you start to notice that they're very, very, very similar to each other and carry words from one translation to the next, going back hundreds of years and to a time when language was used quite differently. And this is not at all to do with how you translate the Hebrew, but to do with changes of usage of English. Often the language is not respectful of people, of foreigners, of harlots, and you know, all these other groups. And he rethought all these words and used words that were respectful. A question which he raised and we actually discussed as a team, because it occurs throughout Tanakh, was the word leprosy. The word, the disease formerly known as leprosy is no longer known as leprosy. It's known as Hansen's disease, and it's of course completely unrelated to tzarat in the Torah. So how should tzarat be translated? There's a certain logic to using leprosy. After all, the sufferers of Hansen's disease have now dissociated themselves with it, specifically because it carries these terrible connotations from the Torah. However, that's a mistranslation, which, not a story for now, but that's a mistranslation which has caused a lot of people a lot of suffering. People within living memory in Israel have reported that the stigma is worse than the disease, and that's in a large part to do with the translation. So that's not an acceptable translation anymore, and it doesn't appear in the Chumash or in the Koran Tanakh, and we found a way around it. I think the translation, specific translation of his that people will notice as striking, and this is an exceptional case, was an eye for an eye, ayin tachat ayin. He was very adamant that he was going to translate that not according to the Pshat, but according to the rabbinic understanding, which is that it doesn't involve any physical kind of revenge, and there's no deceit or underhandedness in that. It's fully footnoted, but he recognized a tendency, a regressive tendency, to look at the our Torah as a more primitive testament and a vengeful and cruel text, and that was not the Torah that he knew, and he was showing us around his hometown. So he showed us the town that he knew. His hometown he saw as beautiful, and he was very excited by literary analysis that was being developed over his lifetime on the Tanakh, the work of Robert Alter and others. And he was very, very keen that a story should be translated as a good story, and a poem should be translated as a good poem, with all the tension and all the color and all the cadence and all the beauty. And that's what he put into the Tanakh, and that's the way he led into the Chumash, which he translated, and the way that he led the rest of the Tanakh, and of course the Siddur and the Machzorim. And Isaiah's promise stroke challenge is in the words of God, "V'ani zot briti otam amar Hashem, ruchi asher alecha, ודבריי אשר שמתי בפיך לא ימושו מפיך ומפי זרעך ומפי זרע זרעך, אמר השם, מעתה ועד עולם." This is my covenant with you, says God. This is my bond and the sign of my bond, that my words that I've placed in your mouth will not leave your mouth, nor your children's mouths, nor their children's mouths, until the end of time. And that's the responsibility of a translator to ensure, and he's ensured that for the next several generations. I owe an immense debt of gratitude to my uncle for enabling me to fulfill a childhood dream in this work, and and for the encouragement that he always gave me. And I know I'm not alone. Many people, when he saw a skill, he would give us an encouragement which was more valuable than the encouragement that I got from teachers and so on, because people would give me encouragement because they wanted the best for me. And he gave us encouragement because he wanted us to give to the world. And he told us to use our skills and develop our skills because they could give something to the world. And that is an incredible gift that I have for the rest of my life. And I think all my life I'll be trying to stay faithful to the faith that he had in me. I want to add one line which I think you would have put at the start, and that is it's strange to be the niece of somebody, particularly somebody you share a surname with, because it's always the second question. You know, what's your name? So you say your first name, and they tease out of you your surname, and the next question is always, are you related to? And that's I found a strange question, and sometimes a question I wanted to hide from a little, because it was so clear from when I was very small that people expected the greatness that my uncle had. Everybody was aware of it, and everybody kind of expected it to radiate to the people around him. And of course, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't confer holiness on others. And it occurred to me many times that it would be a lot more difficult to answer that question if I couldn't hide behind being just a niece. And I know that my cousins would not exchange anything about their father, but that they also must have paid a price for that. And so it seems important for me to say the obvious, which is, of all the incredible achievements that have been listed and talked about more and more and more all this month, I have not a shadow of doubt that the three things he was proudest of were Josh, Dina, and Gila. I would like to say of his Torah and all that he gave us, Hadran alach, v'adrachalan, da'atan alach, v'da'ata chalan, la nitnashe minach, v'la titnashe minan, la ba'al ma'aden, v'la ba'al madate. All that he taught us and gave us will go with us, and we will go with it for the rest of our lives. And I hope that you knew that.
Thank you, Jessica. As mentioned, we are completing 2 cycles of Mishnayos today. And to learn a Mishnah representing the cycle mainly learnt in Israel, I'd like to hand over to Rabbi Gideon Sylvester, formerly of Radlett United Synagogue, and now the United Synagogues Israel Rabbi.
Thank you so much. Lady Elaine, Josh, Gila and Dina, Alan, Brian and Elliot, Chief Rabbi Dayanim and Rabbanim. It's an enormous honor to speak at this event. We're missing Rabbi Sachs so much. I think Rafi Zaram described him as our spiritual father, and that's absolutely what he's been growing up. He's been our spiritual support, the foundations in many ways of our faith. And if we're struggling with his loss, it's hard to imagine how hard it must be for the family. And I send our love from Jerusalem to you all. I was given the privilege of being able to share any Mishnah I wanted, which is quite an incredible privilege. Is the Mishnah being shared? There was a hope that it was going to be shared, but perhaps not. So I'll tell you which one I chose. It's a Mishnah from Avot, Perek Bet Mishnah Chet, and it's just classic Rabbi Sachs, the interpretation that he gives to it, and within his interpretation is so much of what I absolutely love about his Torah. The Mishnah describes how Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 Talmidim, and it lists them, and then it says, Hu haya moneh shivchan. He used to give a listing of their praises. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hulkanas borsut she'enu ma'abed tipa. that Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus is like a plastered cistern that never loses a single drop. Rabbi Hoshua ben Hanania, Ashrei Yoladato. For Rabbi Hoshua ben Hanania, happy is the person who gave birth to him. Rabbi Yossi HaKohen Chassid. Rabbi Yossi HaKohen is a righteous, pious man. Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, Yorechet. He's a fear of sin. And finally, Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach, Me'en HaMitgaber, is like a stream that's constantly gathering its force. And Rabbi Sachs takes this fairly straightforward Mishnah and does magnificent things with it. He does what I absolutely adore about him. He takes something that we've all read dozens of times and he just casts it in an entirely new light. Everyone else focuses on the 5 students and what made them great. Rabbi Sachs focused on the teacher and said how wonderful it is to have a teacher who's able to praise every single one of his students with specific praise and to understand their needs and to understand their achievements. And that was something that Rabbi Sachs did. We've heard it over and over again just today, how kind he was in his letter writing and his thanks and his support for us all. The second thing I love about what Rabbi Sachs does with this Mishnah is, and again, classic Rabbi Sachs, by focusing on a completely different part of the Mishnah that we'd all taken our eye off the ball, he does something that's so incredibly obvious, but it only becomes obvious once he's pointed it out to us. And my feeling when I learn his Torah is, it's not so much that I kick myself, I wish I'd noticed this first. It's rather the feeling, this must be true, because it's so clear and it's so plain and it's so obviously there in the text, and his understanding just feels like you're listening to a true understanding and a novel understanding of a piece of Torah. The third thing that I love about Rabbi Sachs's interpretation of this Mishnah is that it's so full of love and of humanity. And that, again, we've heard over and over again, is Rabbi Sachs, a man whose Torah was always Torah Chesed, a Torah that's full of love and understanding of people who might be vulnerable, understanding of people who are in need, and understanding of people who are in spiritual need. And so when at the end of the Mishnah, it mentions 2 rabbis who went a little bit off the rails, there's Rabbi Sachs understanding how it happened to them. I love Rabbi Sachs's understanding of this Mishnah because it contains within it challenges. It contains within it the challenge to raise critical leaders who'll think for themselves and continue on the path of Torah, each in their own way. And secondly, it gives us the challenge to do what Rabbi Sachs did, which is to go out and give focused love to the people around us. And the fifth thing that I love about the way that Rabbi Sachs taught this piece of Torah is, as he always did, it contains a message of hope. Because what Rabbi Sachs said in his commentary on this Mishnah is that we can change the world, and we can do it fairly simply by just being good, kind, caring people. By having compassion and understanding for others, we can make a real difference to this world. I think also this Mishnah spoke to me on the Shloshim of our beloved teacher, because it also describes Rabbi Sachs himself, a plastered well that never loses a drop. I'm still in complete awe, having listened a couple of days ago to Alan's Hesped for Bar Ilan, for his brother, in which he describes how Rabbi Sachs read a book a day, and he didn't just read them, he took in every single detail of them and was able to analyze it and present it to us in his books. Second, happy is the one who gave birth to this man. I think you just had to have a glimpse of the outpouring of love for Rabbi Sachs over the last few weeks to see how loved he was, how admired he was. The Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, when he describes what messianic times will be like, describes the nations of the world pointing to the Jewish people and saying, Rak am hacham v'navon hagoy hagadol hazeh. This is a wise and understanding people. And I've always wondered what it would look like until I watched the tribute dinner for Rabbi Sachs when he stepped down from the chief rabbinate, and we saw princes and journalists and archbishops and prime ministers lining up one after another in succession to say, this is a great man. This is a man who is a treasure of the nation. It was just a taste of what Messianic times are meant to look like. And of course, Rabbi Sachs focused so much on the idea that giving your parents nachas is the best thing that you can do. And his essay on how he reacted to the passing of his own father is one of the most beautiful, sensitive documents on mourning that I've ever seen. And I pass it on to so many families who are sadly bereaved. Rabbi Sachs was a pious man who went lifnim mishurat hadin, who drove himself with the most incredible determination, working all hours of the day and night to produce Torah, to care for the community, to care for the people within the communities. He was a sin-fearing man. I think there was probably a ton of pressure on him to compromise on Jewish law, to compromise on halacha, and the fact that he spoke with a beautiful English accent and appeared to be so much a man of the people meant that people thought that he might be someone who would break the boundaries of halacha. And he never did. He remained a Talmid Chacham and a Rav throughout his life. And the final description in the Mishnah is of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who was like an ever-flowing stream with boundless creativity. And Rabbi Sachs never stopped showing that creativity in the Torah that he taught, creativity in the ways that he taught it, just endless, boundless imagination in how to learn Torah and present Torah to the world. So I just want to end by, again, sending my love to the family and to thanking you and to thanking his office teams, Simra and Joanna and Dan and Debbie, and there were many, many, many more, and the rabbis who worked with him, because it's not easy to let a giant flourish. And you have cared for him and looked after him, and we've been the beneficiaries. And we're so, so, so grateful to you all. And we know that this must be a time of devastation for you all, and you're sharing it with us and with the whole world. And our hearts go out to you, and we send you our love. Yehi zichro baruch.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Sylvester. Chief Rabbi Dayanim, Morad Asra, colleagues, of course, esteemed Elaine and family here and in Israel. It's been an honor to participate in the Mishnayos learning in Nishmas Mora Moreno Rav Yaakov Tzvi ben Reb David Aryeh. And you'll be pleased to hear that my role today is not to speak, but to be Messiah, to conclude. The final tractate of the Mishnah is an opportunity to thank colleagues, friends, supporters in this country and in Israel and in other places around the world who have participated in this project of learning in Rabbi Sachs' honor and memory. The final tractate in the final Seder Taurus is Uksin. Uksin is one of the most obscure sections of the entire Mishnah, and it gets, as you might say, to the very end of the matter, because Uksin is about what happens when purity matters are taken to their very end. It talks about stalks and items which you're pleased that I'm not going to speak about. And having finished all the laws in the 6 orders of the Mishnah, of which these Uksin, these obscure remaining details of purity and impurity, are the final ones,
the Mishnah briefly discusses the reward for those who engage in learning and observing the rules that have occupied the thousands of sections that constitute the Mishnah, the very basis of our religious life, the Torah Shebaal Peh. The first part of this Mishnah, Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Osid HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahanchil l'chol tzadik v'tzadik shlosh me'os v'asor olamos. In the future, the Holy One, blessed is He, will cause each righteous person to inherit 310 worlds. Shnema, and this rather odd statement is justified by a verse from the 8th chapter of Mishneh Proverbs, Lahanchil oihavayesh, to cause those who love me to inherit yesh. And it's obviously being used as a gematria because the numerical value of the word yesh is 310, which is clearly where the Mishnah got it from. And their storehouses I shall fill. Why yesh? There are all kinds of clever explanations which I shall spare you. But the ultimate metaphor, perhaps, for the extent and the quality of the reward of the righteous in Olam Haba, in the world to come, is yesh. It means continued existence. As the Rambam puts it in his commentary, Hamatzias Hatamidis Asher Ein Lo Tachlis, some kind of constant existence that has no end, which goes on and on. That's the greatest reward, that one's legacy, one's ideas will continue beyond one's life, now and in future generations, whether it is in the lives of those touched, the millions of people touched by Rabbi Sachs, whether it is Talmidim, those who had the enormous privilege of being close to him. The Yeshus, the ability to continue indefinitely and to continue to exist. This is central. This is Asher Ein Lo Tachlis, that has no end. And the final part of the Mishnah, which we've already heard mentioned by Jessica earlier, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta said, as a continuation of this theme, but really as a conclusion to the entire project of learning of this Mishnah, of our Mishnah cycles, and of a life so well lived. The Holy One, blessed is He, found no better receptacle for blessing for the Jewish people other than peace. Shnema, the verse says, Hashem oiz lamo yitain Hashem yivorech es amoy b'shalom, citing its support from Tehillim Kaf Tes 29. The Lord will grant strength to His people. The Lord will grant blessing to His people in peace. And the idea of shalom, of course, something very dear to Rabbi Sachs' heart, as we've heard on many occasions already and referred to today. It's not just a nice way to finish a bracha. It's not just how we finish every Amidah, but it is the destination for us as individuals, as people, and as we celebrate and think about the life and achievements of Rabbi Sachs today. Something which I've taught many times and I heard referred to as a Rabbi Sachs idea last night at the magnificent tribute event, that there are two aspects of Shalom, the vertical and the horizontal. Rabbi Sachs, the peacemaker, stood at the nexus of both. A peace between people, the ability to connect us with each other and communities, and our community to others, but also each of us to our Maker, to the divine. May this learning and this experience and this idea be a aliyah for his neshama.
Thank you, Rabbi Milovsky. Rabbi Mordechai Ginsburg, senior rabbi of Penton Synagogue and the director will offer some closing words and say the Hadra, and this will be followed by a special prayer.
Chief Rabbi, Dayonim, Rabbonim, Lady Elaine, Josh, Dina, Gila, members of the family, friends. We conclude Tachon by saying we don't know that which we should do. Rabbi Sachs, in the famous Green Siddur, quotes the Abudraham in explaining our custom to stand after we say those words. For, like Moses pleaded on behalf of the people, we have prayed in every posture, sitting before the Amidah, standing during the Amidah, and even falling on our faces during Tachanun. We have exhausted the repertoire of prayer and do not know what else to do. I imagine somehow that for you, his dearest family, his wonderful teams that have been referred to, all of us who felt such a connection to him, we don't know now, how do we move forward? What do we do? This Hadron, which concludes our learning of Mishnayos, this occasion which concludes the Shloshim, the 31st and principal days of mourning, Manaseh. For our eyes are turned to you. We stand up as we say that moment, we turn to the divine. If I may just for a moment use a bit of homily, the idea also of the eyes that have been turned for so many decades for inspiration to Rabbi Sachs, realizing he's no longer physically with us. We want to take that inspiration with us, and we do that by connecting with the neshama in the learning of Mishnayos and in resolving to take the lessons of his life with us. Now, how many of the lessons there are? The completion of the learning of all the Mishnayos marks the end of the Shloshim with the Siyum, yet the end of grief is not linear. This week's Hedrash is a very brief thought. Eile Toldos Yaakov, these the generations of Yaakov, says Reb Tzvi Hirsch of Rimenov, Yosef. Add on, take forwards. A Jew never stands still. We move forwards in that journey throughout our lifetime, a journey of discovery, of learning, of inspiration, of connection. Yosef, let that be the Neder, the path we should know, the path he showed us by his example, the path he spoke to us about. Hadran, as Dan Binstock said last night, the returning, the beauty, the pleasure, and also, as we say about the Esther, we identified as Hadar Be'ilana Mishana Lashana, something with the consistency and constancy that's been referred to, and we often overlooked it. We just thought Rabbi Sachs was a superstar almost who fell from heaven, and we don't think about how much he worked upon himself. Let us resolve to take those lessons forward as Hadran, as a way in which we will return, refine the beauty, and will find a way to chart a course without him physically amongst us, but undoubtedly spiritually and in terms of inspiration still with us. And with those thoughts, I now have the honor of saying the Hadran. Hadran loch shito sidrei mishnah v'hadra chalom, da'atna loch shito sidrei mishnah v'da'aton aloch, lo nisnu sheminoch shito sidrei mishnah v'lo sistrei minon, lo ba'alma den v'lo ba'alma da'asi. Hadran loch shito sidrei mishnah v'hadran aloch, da'atna loch shito sidrei mishnah v'da'aton aloch, lo nisnu sheminoch shito sidrei mishnah v'lo sistrei minon, lo ba'alma den v'lo ba'alma da'asi. Hadran loch shito sidrei mishnah v'hadran aloch, Da'at noch shito sidrei mishnah v'da'aton aloch, lo nisnu sheminoch shito sidrei mishnah v'lo yisishtin sidrei minon, lo ba'alma adain v'lo ba'alma da'asi. V'harevno Adonai Eloheinu es divrei Yisrael scholafinu v'fios amcha b'Yisrael v'niyeh kulono anachnu v'tzeh tzo'enu v'tzeh tzo'enu v'tzeh tzo'e amcha b'Yisrael kulono yodei shemecha v'lo yodei Yisrael lishma. Me'oyevaitach meini mitzvosecha ki olam bili yehi libi som fukecha leman le'vosh la'olam le'eshkach b'kutecha kivom chisoni baruch atah Adonai lamdini fukecha amen 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 sela v'ed moedim anachnu fanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'yavisinu shesamta chalkenu miyoshvi b'temedrash v'lo miyoshvi kronos she'onu mashkim v'hem mashkimin onu mashkim divrei Torah v'hem mashkim dvorim b'telim Onu amelim v'hem amelim. Onu amelim mekabel socha v'hem amelim v'eino mekabel socha. Onu rotzim v'hem rotzim. Hem rotzim v'shachas v'onu rotzim l'chaye ha'olam haba. Shnema v'atzor lehim toridim v'shachas Anshe Dumim Mimol Yechutzi, Men Baniv Tachboch. Yiratzonu Famecho Adonai Eloheinu V'Lehavisenu. Kishem She'azar Tonu L'Sayim Seder Mishnayos, Shita Sidrei Mishnah, Kaf Ta'azrim L'Hasus Froim Achem U'Simon, Lilmoid U'Lamed Mitoich HaChova, Nishma V'Lasus L'Kaimes Kol Divrei Samuel Teresecha Ba'ava. U'Schus Kol HaTanoim V'Tamidei Chachom HaNizkorim B'Shita Sidrei Mishnah, Shelamadnu, Yamud Lonu Azarenu Zer Azarenu Shlei Tomash HaTorah HaKadosha Mipinu Pizarenu V'Zer Azarenu Mei Atov Adolom. V'Yikurim Bonu Mikra Shekosuf V'Yisalecho Tamcha Isoch V'Shof B'cho Tishmar Lecho V'Akitzeisa Hi Susichecha Ki V'Yu B'Yamecho V'Yisifko L'Cho Shneis Chayim Oirech Yomim B'Yimino Oisha L'Cho V'Smeila Adonai Oiz Lama Yitein Adonai Yevarech Es Amai V'Shalom. Kaddish is Kadosa.
Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us wherever you might be. And also thank our contributors for today. And Mirz Hashem, in the future we should only meet at Simchas. Let me conclude with some words of Rabbi Sachs. Always remember that you create the atmosphere that surrounds you. If you want others to smile, you must smile. If you want others to give, you must give. If you want others to respect you, you must show your respect for them. How the world treats us is a mirror of how we treat the world. Yeh Zichro Baruch.